Francesco, thanks for having us here at Enel headquarters for this conversation.
It's a pleasure, Larry.
Well, I want us to begin by talking first about the Enel Group. How it started, what it is today, to kick us off.
We are a large utility. We cover all the value chain, so generation, distribution, customer service, and additional services that have to do with demand response and also charging infrastructures. And we need to understand that this comes about from a past that so this utility start with many others across Europe, from a state-owned entity and right after the war that then was privatized and became larger over the years through acquisitions and organic growth outside the country. So this is something that has been going on now for 6 years. We just had last year 6 years birthday.
Okay. Well, we're going to get into a lot of things, talk about innovation, talk about some geopolitics, talk about just looking long term. But I want to begin by focusing on you. You took over as CEO in 2014, and talk about the journey. I mean, when you took this role, what were your expectations?
About the job?
Well, about the job and the role as CEO.
Well, I was in the company already, so I did not come from outside. So I knew a little bit what the company was all about and what was going to happen. I think we had, and I say we, I mean, I came from Enel Green Power, which was the company within Enel that had the renewable energy growth mission. So we in Enel Green Power had a view that renewables were going to become competitive, that generation was going to be changed by this competitiveness. And that was not that obvious yet in 2014. It was obvious to some and not that obvious to most of the people. Yeah. So the expectation and the journey was that this would be happening faster than most people would project, and that it would have to be accompanied by a huge change in the company. And I think that was the idea I had when I took over as a CEO, to prepare Enel for this transition and make sure that we would be managing this transition at the forefront of it and not at the back end of it, which more or less took place. So I'm happy with that.
Yes. So looking back over these years, what would you say perhaps would be one of your major contributions along this journey as CEO?
Well, I think this vision that I had and that I was able to implement, number one. Also, number two is maybe the second step that we took. There was a full digital transformation of the company, moving everything into the cloud. It took about 3 years. Very early in the game, we were the first large utility to do that. And I think we're still the only one that has managed to put everything into the cloud, which prepared us for what happened later with also with the COVID, but what's going on right now with the deep digital transformation of companies like us. Think that, a utility is basically managing billions and billions of data. We manage incredibly amount of data. We are incredible playground for digital. And so the opportunity to fully free our company from, say, constraints of having your own servers and all the complications that come out of that was a great decision, and we're really happy that we did that.
Yeah, as I was preparing for this conversation, Francesco, I just discovered that, ending energy poverty seemed to have been your life's mission, or at least one of your life's mission, right? So how did that come about? I mean, where did you get that drive and that conviction to spend time trying to eliminate energy poverty?
First of all, can you imagine our life, without energy? No. So you would think, why would anyone have to endure this? Why would anyone have to give up its progress, its future, its chance in life, just because there is not enough energy to satisfy its basic needs or to provide for a development? So why are we around as a utility? What's the purpose of us being there if not providing energy to people? So you say that was the the reflection about this was the beginning of basically my interest in energy from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So I think it was a natural evolution of this thinking that energy is about giving a chance to people to improve their life.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, your priority is people that don't even have a chance because they don't have energy. That's very key.
And you're doing it all over the world. I mean, you're in many different geographies, different countries. So you get to see different levels of access to energy as you work around the world.
Yeah, you see, there was, I've been working in energy since the beginning of my working life. So I've seen several waves of transformation and change.
Mm-hmm.
But you've seen how energy transforms and improves lives of people.
Mm-hmm.
How energy can not always improve, but sometimes deteriorate the environment where people live. So it's kind of a both way direction. And so you have to think about, yes, give energy to people, but make sure that while you do that, you don't destroy the environment and the society in which they live. And we've seen several examples of that. I lived in many parts of the world. I've seen completely unsustainable ways of providing energy, and I've seen better ways. So I've started to discriminate between the various alternatives and business models that are there.
Interesting. You mentioned sustainable. So let's go into my next question. So you kind of like looked into my question thing and use a word that got me to it, because I want to talk about Enel's sustainability business model. This is something that you'll be doing a lot around. So talk about, what does circular economy, what does it mean for Enel, this whole circular economy?
I think it has to do with time. So there is a word that is never really used in the context of sustainability, which is time. Why is time important? Because you need to understand, how long do you want to be around? We, as individuals, want to be around forever, okay? But companies, sometimes, they have a short life. And there's nothing wrong with setting up a company that might close in 3 years. You have to be honest and saying, how long as a company I would like to be there? And utilities typically look at very long time horizon. Why is time important? Because can you have business models that collide with a long time horizon? Can you do something that damages society and still think that you can survive long enough? Obviously not. Can you do something against people or against their own interest or against their own welfare and think that you can get around for a long time? For a short time, maybe, but not for a long time. So sustainability for us is with how long can we work on a long term, prosper on a long term, and what practices are in this direction we call sustainable, and what practice they're not aligned with this, we call them unsustainable. It is much wider than just the environment. It has a longer and larger scope.
So I know you've been very involved with the United Nations SE for All. You've been involved in a lot of things about the energy transition. So how does the energy transition fit into the whole circular economy model?
I think the energy transition, it took a while for energy transition to demonstrate that it fits. So first of all, okay, it was not obvious at the very beginning. It was just kind of an environmentally driven argument. So sustainability was defined good for the environment. That was the beginning of all. Then we started to have more societal dimension, saying it's not only good for the environment, but also it's also allowing value to be shared with communities. And remember, there was a moment in which was called corporate shared value.
Yes.
Yeah. So now we're saying actually it's much larger than that. It has to do with avoiding mistakes. It has to do with making things that are aligned with providing energy at convenient cost. So it has to be competitive. That does not harm the environment, but also allows secure supply of energy to the society in which you work. So it complies with 3 targets. security of supply, compliance with the respect to the environment, but convenient, so cheap energy. And today, the transition enables these three factors to fully align, which explains why this transition is happening no matter what. Faster or slower, but it's happening.
Sure.
So we are now in this alignment of the three factors, and that explains why it's gaining traction so quickly.
I want to move into innovation, but before I do that, let's just briefly talk about our industry in terms of misconceptions or perceptions, if you may, right? So what do you think is perhaps one of the biggest misconceptions about the electricity industry from your perspective?
I think there are two. One is that electricity will always be there. It's not so clear. It's not so obvious. And we understand that when there is a lack of electricity that prolongs more than a few minutes. And when you all of a sudden find yourself without electricity, you understand how the world changes without it. And that's a big misconception. We think electricity is basically going to be there no matter what. We give it for granted, okay? And we only accept that there is an interruption if there is such a large calamity that, everything else is, but then electricity needs to be around all the time. And I think that's something that we have to think sometimes it's not so obvious, and it requires so much of a work that is not clearly understood by most people that really needs to be appreciated, if you want. The other misconception is that, you can change the way in which you use energy in your life like this without worrying about the impact on the systems around you. When I say this, I say, how should an electricity system look like when cars will be electric in millions and not in 100,000s? When heat pumps will supplant boilers in our homes, what needs to change? The change is huge. And this is not fully understood by most regulators. And there is a misconception that this can happen, and it's not going to be that of a problem. It is going to happen, but it will require a lot of money and a lot of changes in regulation for this to happen seamlessly. That's a misconception that we need to fully understand.
And I think, I would say we need, as an industry, to do a better job in debunking the misconception, right? Telling a better story about the misconception. All right, let's move into an area I know you like, which is innovation, right? Let's talk about
Everybody likes innovation.
You even created your own word, Enel, right? Something around innovability, right? And your team were telling me that you actually got a trademark for the concept, innovability, right? So let's talk about innovation and go straight to the biggest one, the most recent one, the 3 gigawatt solar factory in the United States. That was something where I think it's tied to some extent with the Inflation Reduction Act and all of these things happen in the U.S. Now, just talk about how that project was developed and how it came about.
It started about 12 years ago when we started a factory producing PV modules together with Sharp, which was a Japanese company, and another company in Italy, ST Macro. This factory was a 200 megawatt factory. Now it looks tiny, but 12 years ago was quite large.
Yeah.
And why did we do that? Because we had, like I said, a hunch that this technology was becoming crucial for the development of generation going forward, but it was just a hunch. It was, and we read a lot of papers, studies, nothing else. So we wanted to really get to know this from the inside. So we decided to invest together with these other two parties and build this factory. Through that, we understood many things. We understood this industry from the inside. Then, for different reasons, one of the parties left, another one decided to leave. We remained the sole owners of this factory and developed the technology inherited from Sharp to the extent that today is a very, very efficient new technology. So we innovated the technology starting from something that was not ours 12 years ago. In the meantime, And, the full industry has changed a lot. 200 megawatt factory is a joke. The average size of a factory is around 3,000 megawatts. So we were deciding what to do with this. Should we sell this technology to some Chinese, or should we build the factory ourselves and push this further on? And we decided to follow this pattern.
Mm-hmm.
So we are building the factory today in Europe, and we will build a sister factory in the US. So 3,000 in Europe, 3,000 in the US, to rebalance and hedge a little bit the present supply chain distortion that sees most of the PV industry originating from Asia and mainly from China, which is basically the result of us in Europe and us in the US not really focusing on manufacturing anymore. But I think it's time to rebalance that. I think that would be not changing much of the presence of balance, but at least providing a hedge. We invest and build about 2,500 megawatts of PV every year. So this 6,000 megawatts is not just for us. It's for the market. We could buy some of them. But it gives us more security of supply. It gives us more control over the longer term. Again, time and sustainability go together.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about the impact from your perspective of the Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S., because I know there's been a lot of discussions about it. How has that affected your North American strategy?
Not that much yet. In the fact that we had consistently invested in the U.S. through the last 13, 14 years, okay? And we have invested through the various administrations that went one after the other, with the PTC, ITC cycles that were ending and restarting with a cycle of 3 to 4 years. Now, we got used to that, like all the industry did. And we only invested because renewables were competitive based on these premises. Now with the IRA, this becomes a much longer timeline. So you can plan 10 years, which is the first time. It's huge change. It's, by the way, a welcome change because the industry was dysfunctional in these three cycles, 3-year cycles, huge, and then nothing, and then start again. It was completely inefficient. So I think it's a great positive development. Clearly, this factory is now possible with a fast development because of that. And I think there will be more development on the infrastructure of charging electric vehicles, which we are building across the US. We are quite a sizable player on the private charging business. We want to go into the public charging business too. So I think there are a lot of promising openings. But they will be in the next strategy presentation, which we typically do in November. This IRA came after that, so we'll have to update it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about EVs and you talk about charging. Those are some of the areas where you're doing more sort of a innovation. So you run one of the largest electric companies in the world. A lot of employees, and as we had our lunch conversation, we talked a little bit about one of the perhaps wild cards in the energy transition, which is workforce.
Yeah.
So talk about how do you at Enel maintain the workforce that you have? I was talking to one of your staff earlier, your head of digital marketing, who's been here from the time his father was at Enel, and he took over, or he took a position just above his father. His wife works at Enel, and it's almost like a big family, right? So talk about how do you preserve that kind of relationship in the long term?
I think this is kind of fading away.
Oh, really?
Because it's a much more turbulent market nowadays.
Okay.
So it is, I think, the workforce is the limiting factor of the transition across the world. So you look at what needs to be done, what transition potential is there, and you know what the speed of the transition could be, and you say, what is it? What is the limit? Is it the money available for investments? No. Is it the projects or the opportunities that Mother Nature and the space allows? Not yet. Is it the amount of hardware that needs to be fabricated and built? To some extent, but that is typically a 3-year cycle that you have a bottleneck and then you work at that and then it all of a sudden becomes no problem at all. So the really inherent limitation is the number of skilled people, trained skilled people that you can put to work, motivate, and manage properly. I know this seems strange, but the amount of change and the growth is so quick and so large that today, I think, for the industry, this is the real bottleneck. So, can you retrain people? Yes, we did a lot of that. Can you hire people? Yes. Can you retain people to some extent? Because there is a fight for talent today in the industry. And I think that is today the limitation that we, as Enel and most of our peers, are facing on the market.
Do you think, Francesco, the policymakers, regulators, even some electric companies, do you think people get it? Is it getting the right prioritization as an area where we need to focus on?
No, we will not fully understand. It's a pity, but it's like that. So maybe it's something we did not talk about enough, or that we have not yet understood fully. Maybe some of the industry players don't get it yet. But I think, first of all, it's not a zero-sum game. So say that I take one guy from you, you take one guy from me, and we're okay. No, we're still where we were, plus we made a mess. So we need to add skilled people to the system, not just steal one from the other and get out of that. So in order to do that, we need a concerted effort between, say, policymakers, academia. Not enough people get out of engineering, not enough people get out of technical schools, not enough people get, there's a lot of shortage in that sense. And the industry itself that needs to be proactive in this. So I think we share this responsibility together. We're still not doing a proper job.
Got to make the industry more attractive. Talk about it. Just two other quick things on innovation. I was intrigued by the new project regarding the RCR Cristalleria in Italia, kind of linking to some green hydrogen facility. So in that context, what's your take on hydrogen?
Hydrogen is a very precious gas which does not exist as pure gas in nature, because hydrogen atoms like to bond with other atoms a lot. So they bond with oxygen, this is a nice mix. They bond with carbon, and you have hydrocarbons. So they bond a lot. And in order for them to be separated from their brother atoms and then put together back, you need to spend a lot of energy. So say a kilo of hydrogen requires about 50 kilowatt hours. If you put them in an electric car, you can drive 180, 190 miles. So it's a lot of energy there, 1 kilogram. So it's a precious substance that today is produced with a heavy carbon footprint, out of gas mostly, sometimes out of coal. So you need to look at how do you want to go about that. If you want to use hydrolysis, clean hydrogen, green hydrogen, you name it, you need to understand that it needs to be cheap enough to be at least as competitive in pricing as the one hydrogen we're using today. And to do this, we're not there yet. So the effort, I think, needs to focus now on making that economic parity, without which a lot of talks around hydrogen will continue to go around, but not that much action. So we are today focusing on some projects that might help us break this parity barrier.
Bring the cost down.
bring the cost down. And I think, classically, if a technology makes a sensible movement in the right direction in the first 2-3 years, then there is a chance that you get there. If it doesn't, this chance becomes really small. So I know it's bad to say this, but not all new technologies are always successful. There are lots of technologies that tried and failed to make it.
Yeah.
I hope this is not the case, but actually I think hydrogen can make it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not rocket science. I think it can be broken down to some kind of competitiveness. And I think it's all going to happen in the next 2-3 years. If we do that, then there is a huge development. And of course, we love it because you can imagine how much the renewable energy demand will be.
Yeah.
Remember, 50 kilowatt hour for 1 kilo. So it's huge.
A lot of green hydrogen coming from Enel.
Yeah.
So before we just move on, one last quick question on innovation. So digitalization, you're a big leader in digitalization. You got a big group at Enel focused on innovation more broadly. Just want your quick take on a few technologies, and you can just say thumbs up, thumbs down, or you could just say, stay distant away. So fusion energy, what's your take? Down.
No, sorry. I'm the engineer. I have to.
Well, that's why I started with fusion, because you're a different engineer.
Fusion energy was there when I graduated, unfortunately, 42 years ago.
Okay.
I mean, where is it now?
Okay, so still light years away.
42 years.
Okay, small modular reactor. Okay.
Could make it.
Could make it, yeah. CCUS. Okay. So the last one, which is more or less way out there, quantum computing as an enabling technology. You think that's
absolutely.
And that fits right into Enel's space of digitalization.
Yeah. I think quantum computing is fantastic. The only problem is that there are not enough problems that quantum computing can be used for.
Okay.
It's funny because the quantum computing capabilities are extremely higher than the complexity of the problems people throw at them. So the issue today, the embarrassing problem with quantum computing, you don't have many problems that you can use them for. And we tried them in very complex logistical combination that, they proved to be extremely powerful.
I would love an environment, Francesco, where you could use quantum computing to solve some of the world's most challenging public policy problems.
The funny thing is that it's strange. It's that our mind fails to understand how you should place problems to quantum computing so that you can use them. I don't know how to explain this, but I remember when I graduated, I hated computing. And this was the last test, the last exam I made when I graduated. I hated it, really.
Okay.
So I had to prepare some kind of problem that a computer would have to solve. And we're talking about a long time ago. So you can imagine, okay. I'm talking about that you had to perforate. Do you remember this?
Yeah, the paper.
The paper. No. So I had the problem I had to teach a computer how to find a way out of a maze. Which is kind of easy. But I myself could not think of another problem for the computer to solve, just because I was not used to computing. So it's like that. So your mind is not focused with the machine, so you cannot provide problems for this machine.
Mm-hmm.
And the quantum computer sits there and saying, guys, come with something.
No, it's an interesting point you're making, because I think it begs the question, are we doing enough in terms of thinking about the problems before we try to solve the problem, right? So
I think if you ask any supplier of quantum computer, IBM is one of them, they will tell you, we have the machine here, come with problems.
I think it's a good segue to our next conversation. Let's talk briefly about security of supply, resilience, geopolitics. Enel, you're in multiple countries. Talk about some of your experiences in going from one country to another, from one project to another country. Talk about some of the lessons learned in that process, working across different geographies. How has that been as an organization for you? Successful?
Yes, I would say successful, provided you make sure that you focus on some things and not too many others.
Okay.
So what unites us? Technology. So how does a machine work in Italy or in Chile? The same way. Thank God the laws of physics don't care about political different systems. So if you focus on what unites technology, then you just remove a lot of complications. And therefore, we prepared an organization in which business lines aligned with technology manage the investments. So you want to maintain a wind turbine, it doesn't matter where this turbine sits around the world. What matters is what kind of stresses it's exposed to. But that's it. So the same guy can manage this decision across the world with geographies without particular problems. And what divides us are those languages, currencies, and customers, because customers sit in different systems with different rules, with different regulatory frameworks, with different currencies, and that is where the money is coming from. Mm-hmm. Who's paying the bill? Customers. Yeah. So we need another dimension to the organization that manages this stuff, the cash raised, and another part that I said before that manages where to put the money, where to invest. So if you combine these two directions, your life improves a lot and the organization works easily. If you try to complicate things around single nations, that's a little bit the problem.
So we talked about multiple countries, we've talked about different regulatory frameworks, which brings me to this idea of electricity diplomacy, right? So the idea came up thinking about Benjamin Franklin. He was an electrical engineer, more or less. He was the U.S. first diplomat.
He was a great guy.
A great guy.
A genius.
He was a genius, right? So talk about how important diplomacy is for the energy transition first, and then we'll come back and ask you, Francesco Starace, as a diplomat for electricity. But let's talk first about the importance of diplomacy for the energy transition.
I think if we understand the importance of energy for societies, so a society with poor access or no access to energy cannot live well, cannot thrive, cannot grow, and therefore sooner or later gets into some kind of problems which then reverberate to societies around it. So have a stable and reliable source of energy, in particular clean electricity, is vital for societies to grow well, and also in growing well, avoid problems to other societies around. So I think it's super important for, if you want to mitigate this perception of geopolitical exposure and risk that we have today, which today is so strong, that the supply of energy is more secure, more convenient, less impactful. And in that sense, I think electricity can help a lot. In particular, decarbonized electricity can really change the geopolitical end of the energy equation. Mm-hmm. We've been used since the 70s to have energy as a geopolitical weapon. I think it's a mistake. Energy should not be a weapon, it should be a tool for establishing good relations, not the other way around.
So you're part of the UN SE for All, you've been involved with that a little bit. So what is your diplomatic strategy as a CEO? Do you see yourself as a diplomat, and what would be your sort of a diplomatic approach to electricity?
I have to be careful here because my brother is a diplomat. I don't want to get to invade his territory.
Okay, but you're an electricity diplomat.
Yeah. I hope he's not listening. But no, I think that the electricity for all, the global compact before, who's deciding the energy policy of a country? The government of that country.
Yes.
So you should give up saying, I'm telling you what you need to do. No. How can a government of a country decide an energy policy based on what kind of information and what kind of data and what kind of outlook? That's really important. And, if you tell me, unfortunately, I've been around enough that if you show me the policy of a country, I can tell you where the politicians of this country have studied, where they come from culturally. Okay, because unfortunately, or fortunately, we all bring our own baggage of knowledge from what we've done through our life.
Yes.
So if you were grown up and educated in the 1970s, and then you disconnected and you did everything else, and you go back to energy in the 70s, all of a sudden your theory and your policy is that one. And you find a lot of that. Still, 70s, 80s, 90s, I can tell you. So the goal of this kind of organizations is to say, not you're wrong, you're right. They say, look, we have this information for you. We have this evidence for you. We can provide you this kind of data, and if you want this kind of additional ways of doing things, then it's up to you to decide. Make sure that you understand that the implications of good decisions can be attract investment or scare investments, and it's up to you. So that's where diplomacy ends. Diplomacy is not something that can impose things, but can try to facilitate the understanding of where the world is going insofar energy is concerned.
Two of the biggest diplomatic challenges we've had over the last 12 to 24 months, one, COVID pandemic, two, Russia invasion of Ukraine. How, from a supply chain perspective, just talk a little bit about how was Enel able to be resilient as an organization in navigating those two crises?
In many different ways, because the COVID crisis, what they have in common, these two crises, where is that when they started, no one had a clue of how long they were going to last. Right? We remember we started with a lockdown somewhere, and we thought, okay, this is going to be like a month, and then that's it. It lasted a couple of years.
Yeah.
So, and the war, we thought, this would be over quickly. It's still there. So, this is the only thing they had in common. Everything else was completely different. So, when you look at the COVID, I think what we managed is, number one, we managed to seamlessly move in this strange virtual space in which we were forced to work, thanks to the fact that we had totally everything in the cloud. So 50,000 people went into the cloud in 2 weeks, and we worked. And this was a huge change, but we were prepared for that. We managed also to invent ways of doing things which we never thought of, even remotely controlling what was going on the working sites through cameras and stuff, which we could have done before, but we were never thinking of.
Yeah.
So we innovated a lot in this sense. When the COVID ended, we found ourselves in a crunch because the supply chain, you remember, of the world was stressed. There was a heavy congestion in the supply routes. Harbors were in disarray, delays in the consignment of goods started to affect projects. But because we had a lot of optionality in our pipeline, we were able to substitute things with other things, and we managed through the 2 years pretty well. That's how we did it. With the Russian aggression of Ukraine, gas prices across Europe went up 10 to 15 times. So you were buying gas 10 times or 15 times higher than you were used to pay before. Electricity prices went through the roof at wholesale level as a result. But because we had in place, not because we were aware of the war was coming, that it was a standard practice, we always sold fixed prices 2 years forward. So by the time the war came up, we had already sold the year 22 and partly of 23 with prices that were fixed at gas levels of 2021. So 10 million customers in Italy and about 4 in Spain were left immune from any impact because we had shielded them from this turbulence. We had an impact on other fronts because clearly for the rest of energy which was needed, we had to pay much more. So we absorbed a hit of about 1.7 billion euros, just 22.
Wow.
But we were able to cope with that because in other parts of the world, we did not have that impact. So the diversification of geographies helped a lot. I think what we have learned today is that the fastest we move out of gas, the better. So that's now what the strategy we presented last year is that we should get out much faster than we originally anticipated from this dependence on commodities that are so volatile. We don't think this is the end of that. It will continue to be a problem going forward.
Yeah. Look, Francesco, you're giving me a lot of your time, and I just want to take a few more minutes and talk about a few more items to wrap up what has been a very interesting, deep conversation, and we appreciate your time. I want to talk about your involvement with the World Economic Forum. You've made a lot of interesting statements there. You were just there a couple of weeks ago. And one thing you said while you were there, you spoke about the need for governments to understand the importance of electrification of the world and the need for renewable energy integration. Talk about that a little bit.
When we talk about the energy transition, 80% of the dialogue and the debate is about the generation end, or renewables replacing thermal generation, which is something that I think we should stop to talk about because it's happening, just happening. Okay, but we never really talk enough about the other part, that is, what happens to the distribution networks, and what happens to them if demand switches to electricity. Because the supply discussion is very much an industry-driven deal. So if we change from one generation technology to another, customers are not aware of that. I mean, those that really are interested, they ask, but I tell you, it's a minority. So it's an intrinsic decision of the industry because it's more competitive and it's best for the environment and it's more secure. But if customers switch from oil or gas to electricity, if cars from internal combustion engine go to electricity, if heating from gas boilers goes to heat pumps, how should the networks change? How should our network look like when cars will be millions, not just 100,000 or 200,000? When boilers will be 10, 20 millions, not 1 million. Heat pumps. So what requirements of investments are there for these networks to be ready and accompany this problem? How do I have to change the network if small generation becomes millions and millions? In Italy, we reached 1 million distributed generation facilities this year. Just Italy. So, and how does that happen if the regulator is not aware of it? Because we're talking about a regulated asset that needs to change deeply, and it can only happen if the regulator agrees to that. How can we let the regulators get into this, understand this, and anticipate this? Otherwise, this stalls the transition. So that's really the point. Demand becomes now very important. Before, we were driving a car with only front wheels traction. Now this car needs to be a four-wheel driving vehicle. We need demand to kick in too, in order for this transition to gain traction.
Yeah, I like that. We're going to wrap up here with maybe just 3 questions to start with. The first one, I want to go back to Enel innovation and talk a little bit about Enel Green Power's 3 Sun Gigafactory. And there's this whole idea of working with, collaboration with France. And just talk, I think it's fascinating what you're doing in that space. Can you just say a few words about it?
I remember the first time that we had this idea of investing into a PV factory, I was not the CEO of Enel, I was the CEO of Enel Green Power. And we saw, PV becoming on paper competitive, just on paper. I mean, panels were expensive. They were $2 a watt. So it's like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Now they are like a tenth of that.
Wow.
So we had studies say they can go to $1. And they said, how can that happen? It has to have huge change. We thought it could happen. So we said, how can we understand this from the inside? We need to get into this technology tree. So we found Sharp. Sharp also worked with Seiya a little bit in France. So we really got into this. And I remember I had to convince the then CEO of Enel, which is a very smart guy, saying, we want to invest in a factory. He said, Francesco, we don't invest in factories. That's not our business. We invest in power plants, not in factories. Wait, what is this? Forget it. He said, look, let's look at it this way. This is a factory, but it's also a power plant that replicates itself every year. You have 200 megawatts. As soon as the panels are manufactured, they start producing. So it's like you have a 200 megawatt plant that every year generates another plant. And it keeps going on. Look at it this way. I think he liked it, or maybe he was just sick and tired of my distance. But anyway, he was great. He said, okay, let's do this. So we did it. And through this journey, we learned a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
We learned how technology can change deeply the industry and what really drives that. So it was, for me, a very important decision. It was marginal. And I think so far the amount of money put into this, when compared to what we do every year, was tiny. But in terms of what thinking changed, it triggered, was really...
So in the sense, the business model changed, right? And that's one of the things Enel has been doing a lot. I mean, you had Enel X, Enel Green Power. Yeah. So you're just bringing new business models to the table. This conversation has been a very fascinating deep dive. When it's being aired, it's going to be at the Global Electrification Forum in Washington, D.C. So you'll be there virtually. They'll be watching this. But I want to end with two questions that I think sort of speaks to your career in this industry and your vision for the future. So the first one is, what concerns you the most about the current state of the world? I know you've worked all over the world. We talk about some of the places you've worked. But when you sit and look at the world today, what really concerns you the most?
Well, I think it's clearly the divisiveness that you perceive. There is a sense of, I don't know why is it, but there is a sense that this what we thought was going to be a global world is now less global and more divisive than before. And I think it is a misconception, first of all. I think it's still a global world. Only that we somehow lost faith in the fact that this getting together creates value for everybody. It's probably justified by some of the imbalances that were manifested itself during the COVID and what fragility is inherent in this kind of imbalances. So it can be corrected. But I'm afraid that this correction comes too late or doesn't come at all. And so people just give up. And this would be, for me, a mistake. So I think the view of the world as a global space must be preserved today. It is a mistake to separate.
Interesting. About 3 years ago, in the midst of COVID, we had the first virtual Global Electrification Forum, and you participated in a virtual conversation. And today we're meeting for the first time in 3 years since COVID, face-to-face here at your headquarters. So on an upbeat, positive note, for the audience who will be watching this around the world, what excites you and gives you hope for the future?
Well, I think the incredible enthusiasm of people. People really want to do good, want to do things that make sense. And I think this is, maybe it was not like that all the time. So this is an area, a time in which if the right purpose is there, people go to great lengths. They do a lot of incredible efforts. So I think it gives a lot of hope that you can actually materially change things, provided you have the right direction and some motivation, bias, and the purpose of what you're doing. I think that's really what it is.
Well, I did tell you that was my last question, but I lied. Because you just gave me another simple question to ask you, which is more personal. And I've known you for many years, an engineer, a great person. You work a lot. You run one of the largest companies in the world. So tell the audience, what do you do for fun, Francesco? How do you relax?
I ride bikes.
Okay.
I like riding bikes. So I like to ride. And of course I can ride during the weekend. I don't work on the weekends.
You don't work at all?
I look at my phone, my iPad, but I don't go to the office. I don't have meetings in the weekend. I hate that. So
That's interesting.
yeah, I know some colleagues get that point, but for me it's fundamental.
Important.
And so I like to ride my bike. I have lots of bikes, so sometimes I feel guilty that I'm not riding that one and that one. So I'm kind of addicted to that. So I ride bikes and I read books. I read poetry mostly.
No electric bikes, though.
No electric bikes.
Okay, so you rarely bike.
No, I don't electrify bike riding.
Okay. Well, Francesco, it's been a pleasure meeting you here in Enel headquarters in Rome, and I hope to see you again. Thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you. Very pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Right.